The penthouse was quiet in the way only expensive places ever were. Not peaceful. Not calm. Just muted. Like the world had been wrapped in thick fabric and set aside. Daniel Hayes stepped out of the elevator and walked down the short hallway toward his front door, his shoes making soft, controlled sounds against the marble floor. He had owned this place for 8 years, yet it still felt temporary, like a hotel suite he kept forgetting to check out of. Same view. Same silence. Same routine. He unlocked the door, stepped inside, and paused. The lights were on. That alone wasn't strange. Rachel usually left the lamps glowing softly when she finished her shift, the way she knew he preferred. But something else tugged at him. A feeling. Subtle but persistent. The air didn't feel settled. Daniel set his coat on the back of a chair and loosened his tie as he walked farther in. The city stretched beyond the windows, Lake Michigan dark and endless beneath the night sky. Somewhere below, sirens wailed and faded, swallowed by distance. He exhaled slowly. This had been his life for years now. Boardrooms by day. Quiet by night. People assumed a man with his wealth must be surrounded by noise, by laughter, by constant company. The truth was simpler. He liked control. He liked predictability. And silence was the easiest thing to manage. He glanced at his watch. 11:23 p.m. "Rachel?" he called out, not loudly. No answer. She should have been gone already. Her schedule was precise. She cleaned, organized, restocked, and left. No lingering. No wasted movement. That was one of the reasons he had kept her on for so long. 6 years to be exact. Longer than most people stayed in his life. Daniel walked toward the kitchen. Everything was spotless. Counters gleamed. The faint scent of lemon cleaner still hung in the air. Normal. Too normal. Then he heard it. A soft sound. Paper shifting. He stopped. It came again. A faint rustle, followed by the unmistakable whisper of bills sliding against one another. The sound came from his study. Daniel felt his shoulders tense. The study was not part of Rachel's routine. She dusted the shelves and vacuumed the rug, but she never touched the desk. Never opened drawers. Never lingered. That room held more than documents. It held parts of his life he didn't like examined too closely. He moved slowly now, every step deliberate. The door to the study was open. Light spilled into the hallway. Daniel stepped inside. And froze. Rachel was on the floor. Not standing. Not cleaning. Kneeling beside his desk, her uniform wrinkled at the knees, her hair pulled back but loosening at the edges. His chair was pushed back. Papers lay scattered across the desk, no longer in their neat stacks. And spread across the surface, neatly arranged, counted, organized, were stacks of cash. His cash. Thick bundles of $100 bills separated into piles, some bound with bank straps, others loose. Rachel's hands moved with careful precision, her fingers counting silently, lips pressed together in concentration. For a brief, disorienting moment, Daniel wondered if he was hallucinating. Then she looked up. Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face. One hand froze mid-count, a bill half lifted from the stack. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice catching. "I." The rest of the sentence never made it out. Daniel's heart pounded, loud enough that he was sure she could hear it. He had walked into hostile takeovers calmer than this. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. "What?" he said slowly, his voice unnervingly steady. "Are you doing?" Rachel stood abruptly, knocking over one of the stacks. Bills slid across the desk and fluttered to the floor like fallen leaves. She dropped to her knees again instinctively, gathering them up with shaking hands. "I can explain," she said quickly. Too quickly. Daniel raised a hand. "Stop." She froze. For the first time since he had hired her, Rachel didn't look composed. Dark circles framed her eyes. Her shoulders sagged as if the strength had been holding her up by sheer will alone. Daniel took a step closer. Then another. How long? He asked. Rachel swallowed. How long what? How long have you been doing this? She looked down at the money, then back up at him. Tears brimmed but didn't fall. I haven't taken anything, she said. I swear. Daniel didn't respond. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, pressing in from all sides. If you're listening to this story right now, maybe late at night or during a quiet moment of your own, this is where things begin to crack open. And if stories like this pull you in, stories about trust, secrets, and the moments that change how people see each other, you might want to stay close. Subscribing makes sure you don't miss what comes next. Daniel finally spoke. You're sitting in my study, he said quietly, with my money spread out on my desk. Rachel nodded, a single tear slipping free. I know how it looks. Yes, he said. You do. She took a shaky breath. Please, just let me finish explaining. Daniel looked at the cash. At the woman he thought he knew. At the room that suddenly felt unfamiliar. He didn't know whether to call security. He didn't know whether to listen. And standing there with the door still open behind him, Daniel realized something unsettling. Whatever Rachel was about to say, it was going to change everything. And he wasn't sure he was ready to hear it. Daniel Hayes liked people best when they stayed exactly where he expected them to be. Board members belonged in conference rooms. Lawyers belonged on speakerphone. Assistants belonged on carefully color-coded calendars. And the woman who cleaned his penthouse belonged quietly in the background of his life, moving through rooms without leaving fingerprints on his piece. Rachel had mastered that role without ever being asked to. He hired her 6 years earlier through a private household agency that specialized in high-net-worth clients. The kind that promised discretion above all else. She arrived for the interview 10 minutes early, stood instead of sitting until invited, and answered questions without embellishment. Yes, sir. No, sir. I can manage that. No sob story. No oversharing. No nervous laughter. Daniel remembered noticing her shoes first. Practical. Clean. Slightly worn but cared for. People who didn't plan to stay long bought cheap things. People who expected to endure invested carefully. She passed the background checks. References were solid. Former employers described her the same way, reliable, quiet, thorough. Daniel hired her the same day. From the beginning, Rachel treated the penthouse like a job, not a privilege. She never lingered by the windows to admire the view. Never asked personal questions. Never commented on the art or the photographs lining the hallway, even though some of them were worth more than most houses. She learned his routines quickly. Coffee mug placed on the left side of the counter, handle turned outward. Newspapers stacked but not folded. Bedroom cleaned only on days he traveled. Study touched last and only lightly. The study was sacred ground. Most staff avoided it entirely. Rachel didn't. She dusted the shelves, vacuumed the rug, wiped the desk surface with careful precision. But she never opened drawers. Never moved papers. Never asked what anything was. That kind of restraint was rare. Daniel noticed. He always noticed. Over the years, he learned small things about her without ever asking. She took public transit even in bad weather. She packed her lunch. She favored neutral colors. When she laughed, rare but real, it was quick and quiet, like she didn't want to take up too much space with it. Once, during a power outage, they had shared an awkward 5 minutes in the kitchen while waiting for the backup generator to kick in. Sorry about the timing, she'd said, holding a flashlight awkwardly. City's been working on the grid all week. It's fine, Daniel replied. I've had worse interruptions. She smiled at that. Just a little. That was the extent of their personal interactions. Daniel didn't know where she lived. Didn't know if she had family. Didn't know what she did after she left his apartment each evening. And that was exactly how he preferred it. Trust to him wasn't built on closeness. It was built on consistency. Rachel showed up when she said she would. Did what she said she would do. And left without complication. For 6 years. which was why what he saw in the study felt so impossible. People often assumed wealth made betrayal easier to accept. That money acted as insulation, dulling the sting of being disappointed. Daniel knew better. Betrayal didn't hurt because of what was taken. It hurt because of what you thought was solid. Standing there, watching Rachel kneel on the floor with his cash spread out like a ledger, Daniel felt something deeper than anger. He felt destabilized. Like someone had quietly shifted the foundation beneath a building he'd spent decades reinforcing. This was the woman he never questioned. The one he trusted enough not to lock certain drawers. The one he never monitored on the security feed because he never needed to. And now, he replayed the past few weeks in his head. Had she seemed different? Maybe a little quieter. Maybe more tired. He remembered noticing her hands shake once while pouring cleaning solution into a bucket. He'd assumed it was caffeine. Or stress. Everyone had stress. He remembered a day she asked to leave early. She'd apologized twice. That wasn't like her. He remembered nothing else. Because he hadn't been looking. Rachel stood now in the middle of the study, hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes fixed on the floor. She looked smaller than usual. Not physically. Emotionally. "I know this looks bad," she said softly. Daniel didn't respond. He was thinking about all the times he'd walked past her without really seeing her. All the assumptions he'd made because things had always worked. "You've never given me a reason to doubt you," he said finally. Her shoulders trembled at that. "I know," she replied. "That's why this hurts." The words landed heavier than she probably intended. Daniel glanced at the scattered bills again. At the room that suddenly felt exposed. Vulnerable. He realized then that whatever explanation she was about to give wouldn't be simple. And worse, it might not be something he could undo once he heard it. He took a breath. "Start talking," he said. Rachel lifted her head. And for the first time since he'd known her, she didn't look like someone who had everything under control. She looked like someone who had reached the very edge of it. Rachel didn't speak right away. She stood there, fingers knotted together so tightly her knuckles had gone pale, breathing shallowly as if every inhale had to be negotiated. The study felt smaller than it ever had, the walls pressing inward, the air heavy with the smell of paper and polished wood. Daniel waited. Silence was something he understood. He'd used it in negotiations, in boardrooms, in moments where the first person to speak usually lost. But this silence wasn't tactical. It was fragile. And he wasn't sure how much pressure it could take. "I wasn't planning on you coming home this early," Rachel said finally, her voice low. Daniel glanced at his watch again. "Same time as always." "This is early for you?" he asked. She nodded faintly. "You're usually closer to midnight on Thursdays." That caught him off guard. He hadn't realized she tracked his schedule so closely. "Is that why you're here?" he asked. "Because you thought you had time?" Her jaw tightened. "I thought I had privacy." The distinction mattered. Daniel exhaled through his nose and stepped farther into the room. His shoes brushed against a stray bill on the floor. He bent down, picked it up, and smoothed it between his fingers. "Rachel," he said evenly, "you're standing in my study, with money that was locked away this morning." She flinched at the word locked. "I didn't break anything," she said quickly. "The drawer was already unlocked." "That doesn't make this better." "I know," she whispered. He walked around the desk slowly, deliberately. The stacks were uneven now, disturbed by her sudden movement. Some of the bills were older, creased at the corners. Others were crisp, barely touched. Daniel felt a strange detachment as he observed them. He'd moved more money than this before breakfast on some days. Yet seeing it here, spread out by someone else's hands, made it feel exposed. Personal. "How long have you been in here tonight?" he asked. 20 minutes, she said. "Maybe less." "And other nights?" She hesitated. Daniel stopped walking. "Other nights," he repeated. Rachel swallowed. "This is the first time." He studied her face, searching for cracks. Lies tended to rush. They over-explained. Rachel didn't. Then why the desk? He asked. Why not leave everything where it was? Her gaze dropped to the floor again. Because I needed to see it. See what? How much there really was. The word sent a chill through him. Daniel leaned back against the edge of the desk, arms crossed. And what were you planning to do with that information? She shook her head. I don't know yet. That's not reassuring. I know. Her honesty was disarming. There was no performance in it. No attempt to soften the truth. Just exhaustion. I didn't take anything, she said again, firmer this time. I wouldn't. You're counting it, Daniel replied. That's not nothing. Rachel nodded. I crossed a line. I know I did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the building systems filled the silence. Somewhere below, a car horn blared, distant and irrelevant. Daniel thought about calling security again. About pressing a button and letting someone else handle this. That was the logical move. The safe move. But logic felt insufficient here. What changed? He asked. Rachel looked up slowly. What do you mean? You've worked here 6 years, he said. 6. And nothing like this has ever happened. So tell me what changed. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted to the door. Then back to him. I don't want to make excuses, she said carefully. I didn't ask for excuses. She nodded once. I know. Another pause. I'm not in the habit of making impulsive decisions, she continued. This wasn't impulse. It was pressure. From where? Everywhere. Daniel waited. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Have you ever felt like your life was narrowing? She asked quietly. Like options were disappearing faster than you could replace them? He didn't answer right away. Yes, he said eventually. She met his eyes then. Really met them. I'm there, she said. The words hung between them, heavy but vague. Not enough to explain the scene, but enough to suggest it wasn't simple greed. Daniel felt his certainty begin to erode. Just slightly. Enough to be dangerous. I need specifics, he said. Because right now, all I see is someone I trusted doing something I can't ignore. Rachel nodded. I understand. She took a step toward the desk, then stopped herself as if unsure whether she was allowed. I can tell you, she said. But once I do, you won't be able to unhear it. Daniel felt a strange tightening in his chest. Try me, he said. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were glassy but steady. Okay, she said. But you need to know something first. Daniel waited. Her voice dropped to a whisper. This isn't just about money. She took another breath. It's about time. And I'm almost out of it. Daniel straightened. Because suddenly the room felt less like the scene of a crime. And more like the edge of a confession he wasn't prepared for. And whatever Rachel was about to reveal next, it was clear it wasn't going to make this situation easier. It was going to make it worse. Daniel froze mid-step, the words he wanted to say caught somewhere between his chest and throat. He had been in tense boardrooms, negotiating deals worth millions. He had faced hostile investors, betrayal by partners, and lawsuits that could have ruined him. Yet nothing in his experience compared to this. Rachel knelt on the floor beside his desk, bills splayed across the polished wood like a chaotic mosaic, her hands trembling ever so slightly as she tried to straighten them. Her uniform was wrinkled at the knees, and the faint sheen of sweat on her forehead suggested she had been in this position for longer than she admitted. He blinked once, twice. The sight refused to make sense. The trust he had invested in her over 6 years now felt fragile, like a crystal vase teetering on the edge of a shelf. Rachel? His voice was low, almost a growl. She jerked upright, her fingers brushing a stack of bills as she rose, sending a few fluttering to the floor. Her eyes widened, scanning his face, searching for a clue, a hint of forgiveness or perhaps judgment. I can explain, she said quickly, almost pleading. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You're standing in my study, kneeling over my money, and you can explain this? It's not what it looks like, she rushed to clarify. But that only made him pause. The words, rushed and fragmented, sounded honest. There was no attempt to feign composure, no calculated calm that would come with deception. She looked like someone cornered, caught between necessity and morality. He took a careful step closer, observing her. There was fear in her eyes. Real fear. Not the practiced fear of a liar, but the raw human kind. Then tell me, Daniel said, his tone measured. Tell me what it is and don't leave anything out. Rachel exhaled, a shaky sound, and lowered herself onto a chair across from him instead of returning to the floor. She clasped her hands tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed somewhere just above the edge of the desk. I'm not stealing, she said, voice almost too quiet to hear. I would never take from you. Not ever. But I needed to know. To know what? How much you had, she admitted, glancing at the stacks of cash. I needed to see it. To plan. To understand what could be done. For them. Daniel's brow furrowed. Who? My family, she whispered. My brother. My mom. They're in trouble. I didn't know where else to turn. I didn't want to ask you directly. I was afraid you'd look at me differently. Like I was incapable. The confession hit him like a punch. He had assumed greed at first, assumed betrayal. But this was desperation layered with fear, with pride, with a protective instinct that he could barely comprehend. Rachel, he said slowly, you're kneeling over hundreds of thousands of dollars and you think this was the only way? I didn't touch anything, she said firmly. I just counted. I needed to know if I could fix it without anyone noticing. Without anyone having to help me. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. He had always believed trust was unbreakable if nurtured. Yet here it was, bending under the weight of circumstance, of hidden lives, of desperate needs. Do you understand, he asked, his voice quieter now, that this could have ended very differently? That I could have called security or worse, assumed the worst? Rachel nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. I know, and I'm sorry. More than anything, I'm sorry. Daniel studied her for a long moment. The human cost of wealth and trust collided in his mind. She wasn't stealing. She wasn't lying. She was navigating the kind of desperation most people never see. And yet, she had crossed a line he hadn't even realized existed until now. He exhaled slowly. Then tell me everything, he said, from the beginning. Don't leave anything out. And no matter what, I need you to be honest with me. Rachel swallowed hard, as if the act of speaking was its own kind of trial. Okay, she whispered. As she began, Daniel leaned back in his chair, the city lights casting long shadows across the study. Somewhere below, a siren wailed briefly, a reminder that the world outside continued, oblivious to the drama unfolding in his penthouse. And somewhere inside him he realized that once he heard her story, nothing, his trust, his assumptions, his carefully curated life, would ever be the same. Because tonight, the foundations of everything he thought he knew were about to be shaken. And he wasn't sure he was ready. The moment hung there, suspended between truth and fear, the first thread of a story that was far more complicated, and far more human, than he could have ever imagined. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, and studied Rachel. She was sitting on the edge of the opposite chair, hands clenched in her lap, her shoulders hunched as if she could fold herself into invisibility. The room smelled faintly of dust and lemon cleaner, the city outside humming softly beneath the glass windows. For a moment, the only sound was the distant wail of a siren and the quiet shuffle of Rachel's uniform as she shifted nervously. Start from the beginning, he said, voice low but firm. I need to understand everything. Rachel took a shaky breath, her eyes glancing at the stacks of bills on the desk, then back at him. It started a few weeks ago, she began. I found out my mom's medical bills, they're worse than I thought. Insurance isn't covering enough and she needs medication every week, dialysis sometimes twice a week. I couldn't figure out how to make it all work. Daniel listened silently, noting the tremor in her voice. It wasn't crafted for effect. It was raw. Real. And then there's Jerome, she continued. Her voice faltered slightly. My younger brother, he got mixed up with some people he shouldn't have. Gambling debts, eviction notices, people threatening him. I had to find a way to protect him. Daniel leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. And you thought counting my money was the answer? I wasn't going to take it, she said quickly, almost desperately. I just needed to see if it was even possible to help them without anyone noticing. Her explanation hit him harder than he expected. Betrayal wasn't always obvious. Sometimes, it was a misjudgment of circumstances, of priorities. And here, Rachel had done something reckless, not out of greed but out of desperation. He rubbed his forehead. You could have asked me. I would have helped. She shook her head, biting her lip. I couldn't. I didn't want your pity. I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle it. And I thought, maybe I could fix it quietly. On my own. Daniel's chest tightened. He could almost see the mental map she must have made in her head. Bills, debts, threats, deadlines. Her own life compressed into a fragile, ticking plan. And the desk tonight? He asked. You had to count everything here? She nodded. I had to know what was possible. How much I could manage. I thought if I could figure it out, maybe I could save them both. The words hung in the air. Daniel noticed the small details, the way her knuckles were white from gripping her hands, the slight tremble in her shoulders, the faint smell of coffee on her uniform from a long day of work. She looked like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. You realize, he said slowly, you've broken every rule I've ever had about this apartment. About my money. About trust. I know, she whispered. And I'm sorry. I never wanted to do anything wrong. I was running out of time. I didn't know what else to do. Daniel stayed silent for a long moment, letting her words settle. Anger still simmered beneath the surface, but beneath that, a new understanding began to form. She hadn't stolen. She hadn't lied. She had acted out of fear, love, and sheer determination. He could see the humanity in her, the flaws, the fears, the desperation, and it made her all the more real. Vulnerable, yes, but incredibly brave in ways he hadn't considered before. You've been working for me 6 years, he said finally. I've trusted you with everything in this house. And now, I don't know how to feel. Rachel looked down, ashamed. I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me, not yet. I needed to explain. I couldn't live with keeping it from you any longer. Daniel exhaled, leaning back and staring at the ceiling. The city lights flickered across the room, a quiet reflection of the turmoil inside. He had expected this moment to be simple. Confrontation, clarification, resolution. But it wasn't. Reality rarely was. And somewhere deep down, he knew this night would change the way he saw Rachel, himself, and the fragile line between trust and necessity. He finally looked at her, meeting her gaze. All right, he said. You've explained. Now, tell me everything. Step by step. And don't leave anything out. Rachel swallowed hard and nodded. As she began her story, Daniel felt a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. He didn't yet know the full extent of her situation. He didn't know the choices she had made, or might still make. But he did know one thing. Nothing in this apartment, nothing in these 6 years of routine, would ever be the same again. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of the penthouse, the first seeds of suspense settled like dust, because what Rachel was about to reveal could either destroy everything between them or show him a side of her he had never imagined. The room seemed to hold its breath. And Daniel realized he wasn't ready for it. Because in that silence, the story was only just beginning. Daniel sat back in his chair, letting the silence stretch for a moment longer. He could feel the tension in the room, thick and almost suffocating. The city hummed faintly beyond the windows, indifferent to the storm brewing inside his penthouse. He had faced pressure before, shareholder meetings that lasted hours, lawsuits that threatened to take everything, but nothing had ever rattled him like this. Rachel sat opposite him, still on the edge of the chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She avoided eye contact, but Daniel could see the way her shoulders trembled slightly, the faint quiver in her voice each time she exhaled. She looked small but not weak, determined yet fragile, vulnerable yet brave. And he couldn't stop noticing how human she seemed all of a sudden. "Let me make this clear," he said carefully, keeping his voice even. "If you've taken anything from me, anything at all, I need to know. Because if you have, this isn't a conversation anymore. It's a problem." "I didn't," she said softly, almost a whisper. "I've never taken a single cent. I swear it. I couldn't." Daniel studied her. He wanted to believe her. Every instinct told him she was telling the truth. But trust wasn't something you could just switch on, not after seeing stacks of cash sprawled across the desk like some reckless mess. "You've always been careful," he said slowly. "Meticulous. Quiet. Never crossed a line before. So why tonight?" Rachel's eyes finally met his and he saw the weight behind them. "I've been careful my whole life," she admitted. "And sometimes, being careful isn't enough." Daniel's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean that life doesn't wait for you to be perfect," she said. "It doesn't care how meticulous you are. Just happens. And sometimes, if you want to protect the people you love, you have to step over lines you never thought you would." The room grew heavier as he absorbed her words. He could feel the tension winding tighter with each breath. Daniel had built his life around control, predictability, and measured responses. And here she was, exposing the chaos he had worked so hard to keep out of his world. "Are you saying you were thinking about taking it?" he asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "No," she said firmly. "I was thinking about what I had to do to help them. I was planning. That's all." Daniel ran a hand over his face. "Planning? That's supposed to make me feel better?" "I didn't touch anything," she insisted. "I swear. I wouldn't. But I had to know if it was even possible to help them without anyone noticing. Without anyone having to help me." He leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. The room seemed smaller now, tighter somehow. His mind raced, calculating, analyzing, questioning. Logic told him to be angry, to call security, to treat this like any other breach of protocol. But logic wasn't the only thing at play here. Because underneath the fear, under the trembling hands and the scattered cash, there was something else. Something raw. Something human. He could see it in the way she bit her lip, the subtle shaking of her shoulders, the way her eyes avoided his but didn't look away. She wasn't lying. She wasn't scheming. She was desperate. And that desperation, it demanded attention. Daniel exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. "All right," he said finally. "Let's assume you're telling the truth. That you haven't taken anything. That you've just planned. Why didn't you come to me?" Rachel's lips pressed together. "I couldn't. I didn't want your pity. I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle it. And I didn't know if I could." He studied her for a moment. Her honesty, her courage, even in fear, was remarkable. Yet it still didn't erase the tension. The breach of trust was real, even if the theft wasn't. "You could have asked me," he said quietly. "I would have helped. I always would have helped." "I know," she whispered. "But I didn't know that then. And I thought maybe I could fix it on my own." Daniel exhaled again, leaning back. The hum of the city filled the room, blending with the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the apartment. The situation was delicate. The stakes were higher than they seemed. And yet, amidst the anger and confusion, he felt something shift. He realized that trust wasn't gone. It had been tested, stretched thin, but it wasn't completely broken. Not yet. And if he wanted to understand the full story, the truth behind her actions, he would have to listen. Because whatever Rachel was about to reveal next could change everything he thought he knew. And for the first time in years, Daniel Hayes felt unsure of what would happen next. Outside the window, the city lights shimmered, oblivious to the storm unfolding within. And Daniel knew one thing for certain. The night was far from over, and neither of them would leave this room the same. The moment hung in the air, thick with suspense, and Daniel realized that the next word she spoke could either save her, or destroy everything. Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a shaky breath. When she opened them again, Daniel could see the exhaustion etched deep into her face, the kind of weariness that sleep alone couldn't fix. She wasn't just tired from a long day at work. She was carrying months, maybe years, of worry and responsibility on shoulders that were far too small for the weight. "You want to know why I did it?" she said quietly, voice trembling just enough to reveal her fear. I guess you have a right to know." Daniel nodded slowly, leaning back, letting the chair absorb some of the tension. He wasn't about to interrupt. Not now. "It started a couple of weeks ago," Rachel began. "Mom's health started getting worse. The bills, the insurance isn't enough. And she's scared, Daniel. She's scared I can't keep her alive." She swallowed hard, tears threatening to spill but held them back. "I couldn't let her see me panic. I couldn't let her feel hopeless even though I was terrified." Daniel listened carefully. He had no frame of reference for this kind of fear, this kind of responsibility carried alone. He was used to controlling things in a business sense. Contracts, deadlines, numbers. But this was personal, human, raw. "And then Jerome," she continued, her voice quieter now. "My brother, he got himself into something bad. Gambling, debts, dangerous people. I don't know how it started exactly, but he called me the other night, crying, saying they were threatening him. They said if he didn't pay, he would lose everything and worse." Daniel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had known people in his circles with debts, shady loans, and shady people chasing them. But this was real, immediate, and close. "I didn't know what to do," Rachel admitted, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I didn't want to ask anyone for help, not friends, not neighbors, not anyone. I thought maybe I could figure it out myself. But I kept hitting walls. Every time I tried a solution, something else went wrong. Mom's bills piled up, Jerome's threats got worse, and I just felt trapped." Daniel stayed silent, absorbing every word. He had assumed betrayal. A breach of trust. And yet, what she described was desperation, compounded by pride, by love, by the kind of responsibility most people would crumble under. "I was walking home from work a few nights ago," she said, voice breaking slightly, "and I passed the cash machine near the street. There were envelopes inside from deposits, stacks of money, and I thought, maybe if I knew exactly how much, maybe I could plan. Maybe I could help without anyone knowing." Daniel's pulse quickened. He had assumed danger, risk, malice. But this was survival. Love, fear, responsibility. "I didn't touch anything," she said quickly, seeing the shadow cross his face. "I just counted. That's all. I wanted to see if it was even possible to help them both before it was too late. I didn't know what else to do." Daniel exhaled, running a hand down his face. Logic and reason fought with instinct. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to feel betrayed. And yet, he understood in a way he hadn't expected. "You could have asked me," he said finally, voice quieter now. "You know that, right? I would have helped." Rachel's eyes welled with tears. "I know. I couldn't. I didn't want your pity. I didn't want you to see me as incapable. I thought I could handle it. I thought I had to." Daniel leaned back further, letting the leather chair bear some of his tension. He had built his life on control, on careful planning, on certainty. And here she was, exposing a vulnerability, a desperation he had never had to face. The room felt smaller now. The stacks of cash that had once seemed like the source of betrayal now felt almost irrelevant, dwarfed by the weight of her story. "And tonight," she said, her voice barely audible, "I came here because I was out of time. I had to know if there was a way. If it was even possible." Daniel remained silent, letting her words sink in. The complexity of the situation, the humanity of her actions, the desperation, it was all unfolding in front of him, raw and unpolished. He realized then that this wasn't about money. It was about life, about survival, about choices that no one else could understand unless they were walking the same narrow path. And he also realized something else. He didn't know if he was ready for the next part of her story, because what came after desperation often involved consequences, and Daniel was about to see just how far Rachel had gone in trying to protect the people she loved. The silence in the study deepened, and the city outside continued its oblivious hum, unaware that in this penthouse, trust, loyalty, and survival were being tested in ways Daniel had never imagined. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew this night was far from over. Rachel took a shuddering breath, trying to steady herself as she continued. Daniel remained silent, his eyes fixed on her, waiting, though every second stretched unbearably. The study, once a place of order and control, now felt tense and unpredictable, every shadow and object suddenly alive with potential revelations. "My brother, Jerome," she began, her voice low and cautious, "he got involved with some people he shouldn't have. At first it was just money, small loans, gambling debts, but it escalated quickly. People started threatening him. Phone calls at all hours. Letters slipped under the door. They came to the apartment once. He was terrified." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had dealt with high-stakes negotiations and corporate pressure, but he had never encountered the kind of raw fear she was describing. Real fear tied to human lives and the fragility of family bonds. "I tried to help him," she continued, wringing her hands, "but every time I thought I found a solution, something else went wrong. They were relentless. And he started hiding things from me, thinking he was protecting me. But it only made things worse." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "And that's why you thought counting my money would help?" Rachel nodded. "I needed to know if it was even possible to get them out of it without anyone knowing, without drawing attention. I didn't want to ask for help. I didn't want to be judged or pitted or thought incapable. I wanted to protect them. I felt like it was all on me." Daniel ran a hand down his face. He had always believed wealth insulated him from human fear, but here was a woman, kneeling in his study, demonstrating the kind of desperation he could never have imagined. She wasn't greedy. She wasn't reckless. She was trying to save 2 lives. "Did you ever think you might get caught?" he asked, his voice low. "Did it ever occur to you that this could destroy the trust we've built over 6 years?" "Yes," she admitted immediately. "Every single time I touched a bill, I thought about the consequences. I felt sick. But I also knew that if I didn't figure something out soon, my family, they wouldn't survive this." Daniel's mind raced. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to feel betrayed. And yet, it was hard to sustain that anger against someone acting out of love and desperation. "You've carried all this weight," he said finally, "on your own?" Rachel's shoulders sagged further. "I tried not to. I tried to be strong. But it's like drowning. You keep swimming, but the water keeps pulling you down." Daniel leaned back, his mind analyzing, calculating, trying to find a logical next step. Security cameras, insurance claims, money transfers. All the practicalities he normally controlled suddenly seemed secondary. This wasn't about logic. This was about human lives, fear, and choices made under pressure. "Do you realize," he said slowly, "that you could have ruined everything between us tonight?" "I know," she whispered, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "I know I crossed the line. But I didn't touch anything. I swear. I needed to know what I could do." Daniel exhaled, letting the tension ease slightly, though a knot of unease remained. He realized that her actions were driven by desperation, not deceit. And that realization made the room feel simultaneously lighter and heavier. Lighter because no money had been taken, heavier because the depth of her struggle was staggering. "And your brother?" he asked. "Where is he now?" "He's hiding," she said quietly, "trying to figure out how to get out from under the threats. I can't reach him directly, not yet. That's why I had to plan. I needed a way to protect him before it was too late." Daniel remained silent, processing her words. He had expected betrayal. What he got was something more complicated: fear, loyalty, love, and a staggering sense of responsibility carried alone. The study felt impossibly still, except for the faint rustle of papers and the soft hum of the city beyond the windows. Daniel realized that the night wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about choices, morality, and survival in a world that didn't wait for anyone to be perfect. And deep down, he knew that whatever came next in her story could completely change the way he saw her, and himself. Because desperation had a way of pushing people to places they never thought they'd go. And Rachel had gone there tonight. The next words she spoke would either clarify everything, or shatter the fragile trust that still lingered between them. Outside, the city lights glimmered, indifferent to the human drama unfolding high above. And Daniel realized that whatever decisions he made in the next few minutes could ripple far beyond this room, far beyond the stacks of cash that had drawn him into this confrontation in the first place. A chill crept down his spine. This was far from over. Daniel leaned forward, elbows resting on the desk, his gaze locked on Rachel. He could feel the tension coiling in his chest, tight and persistent, the kind that made it hard to breathe, as if the weight of her confession had physically settled there. "Okay," he said slowly, "you've explained why you came into the study. You've explained the fear, the desperation, the family situation. But there's still something I don't understand." Rachel looked at him, her lips pressed together, nodding slightly. She had been preparing for this moment, he realized. Every trembling breath, every careful word had led to this point. "You didn't just sit down and count my money," he continued, voice quiet but firm. You arranged it, organized it. You separated bills, made piles, stacked them. That's not something someone does if they're just counting. There's intention there. What were you planning exactly?" Rachel hesitated, her hands clutching her knees. I needed to see everything clearly. To understand how much I could use if I had to, how much could go where. I made piles, yes, but only for clarity. I didn't take a single dollar. Daniel's brow furrowed. "You expected me to believe that?" "I hope you will," she said softly. "I know how it looks. I know how it seems. But it wasn't theft. It was planning. Survival planning." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Planning for survival, with my money, in my study, without telling me." "I didn't have a choice," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every moment counted. Every day mattered. And if I had asked for help, I don't know if I could have acted fast enough." Daniel studied her. The human cost of fear and love was something he understood intellectually but not emotionally. He had seen people make irrational decisions in boardrooms, but this was different. This was personal. It wasn't about power or leverage, it was about protecting someone else. "You realize," he said finally, "that what you just told me, it changes everything I thought about this moment. And yet it doesn't erase the risk. You could have destroyed trust tonight. Any decision, any misstep, and this could have ended very badly." "I know," Rachel said, eyes glistening. "I was terrified. I still am. But I couldn't wait any longer. I had to see if it was even possible to help them before it was too late." Daniel exhaled slowly. He had built his life on certainty, on structure, on control. And here, that control had been tested in a way he hadn't anticipated. The trust he had in Rachel, built carefully over 6 years, had been bent but not broken. "Not yet." "And your brother?" he said, leaning back. What's the plan for him now? Rachel hesitated. I have an idea, but I need time. And I need to know that you trust me even a little. That you understand why I did this. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had always believed that trust was earned through consistency, through adherence to rules. But what she had done wasn't about breaking rules. It was about human desperation, about a situation so dire that rational solutions weren't enough. Do you understand, he asked carefully, that if anything had gone wrong tonight, you could have lost everything? Not just your job, but your dignity, your credibility, your life here. Rachel nodded. I know, and I accept that. But I had to do it. I didn't see any other way. Daniel leaned back, letting his eyes drift over the piles of cash and the woman who had always seemed untouchable, unwavering. He realized that fear and love could push someone farther than he had ever imagined. And right now he was seeing it firsthand. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the city below. Daniel felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the uncertainty, the suspense, the realization that everything he thought he knew about control, trust, and responsibility had just shifted. And somewhere deep down he knew that Rachel's next words, or the decisions she would take in the coming days, could change the course of everything. Because desperation had a way of leading people into unexpected territory. And Daniel realized, with a sinking sense of anticipation, that whatever came next would test both of them in ways neither could yet imagine. The room felt smaller. The stacks of cash seemed almost symbolic now, a fragile line between trust and fear, loyalty and survival. And Daniel knew one thing for certain. The night was far from over, and the story was only beginning to unfold. Daniel sat in the leather chair, his fingers steepled under his chin, trying to process everything Rachel had just revealed. The study felt impossibly quiet, except for the faint hum of the city outside and the soft shuffle of papers she had left slightly disorganized on the desk. He had always prided himself on control, on understanding the world in terms of numbers, schedules, and predictability. But tonight, control felt meaningless. Rachel was still sitting across from him, shoulders tense, hands clenched in her lap. She hadn't moved since telling him about her brother and mother. Her eyes, dark and tired, flicked to his occasionally as if seeking approval, or perhaps mercy. "Let's be clear," Daniel said slowly, his voice measured. "You came into my study with stacks of cash, under no authority for reasons you never told me. And you did this for your family." "I did," she admitted, the words simple but heavy. "I didn't want anyone else involved. I just wanted a plan I could rely on. I never intended to cross lines. I had to see what was possible." Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I've had employees make mistakes before," he said, voice low. "I've had people take what wasn't theirs. But this feels different. Because there's no malice. Just desperation. And that makes it complicated." Rachel's lips pressed together. "I know. I'm sorry you had to see it like this." Daniel leaned back, thinking. He had always measured trust and loyalty in precise terms. But this was impossible to quantify. He could understand the logic of her actions, the human instinct to protect family. Yet the method, the recklessness, the secrecy, made his pulse tighten. "And tonight," he continued, "when you finally realized you were running out of time, that's when you came here. To my study. To my money. To figure out if there was any way to save them." Rachel nodded. "Exactly. Every minute counted. I couldn't wait for someone else to act. I couldn't risk failure. And I couldn't ask you, because I didn't want to be seen as weak or incapable." Daniel's eyes narrowed, scanning her face. She looked fragile, but there was an undeniable fire in her gaze, a determination that was almost frightening in its intensity. She had calculated risks that even he might not have dared to consider, and yet she hadn't stolen. She hadn't lied. She had only planned. "And the piles of money," he said finally, gesturing toward the desk. "The organization, the counting, That was purely for planning? Yes, she said immediately. I needed to know what I could allocate, what was possible, what could actually make a difference. I wasn't taking anything. I was trying to save them. Daniel exhaled slowly. The human cost of love and desperation was something he understood now in a way he hadn't before. He had always believed that wealth insulated him from danger, from emotional vulnerability, from human unpredictability. He was learning tonight how little money mattered when lives were at stake. You know, he said finally, what you did tonight, it could have ruined everything between us. Any misstep, any mistake, and I could have reacted differently. I could have assumed the worst. I know, she whispered. And I accept that. I would accept it if you never trusted me again. I had to do it. I had no choice. Daniel leaned back further, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. He had always seen trust as fragile, but he was beginning to understand that trust could also be resilient, stretched thin, tested in ways no one could predict, yet capable of surviving if the foundation was real. And now, he asked quietly, what happens next? How do you plan to protect them? Rachel's gaze fell to the floor. I have an idea, but it will take time, and I need to act carefully. One wrong step could put them or me in danger. Daniel's chest tightened. He knew the gravity of her words. The room, once orderly and predictable, now felt charged with tension, like a wire stretched taut. Every choice from this moment onward would carry consequences. He realized something chilling. This night wasn't about money anymore. It wasn't about protocol or rules or control. It was about human lives, loyalty, and survival. And Daniel understood that whatever plan Rachel was about to execute, it could either save the people she loved, or unravel everything they had built together over 6 years. The stacks of cash on the desk seemed to loom larger now, almost symbolic of the thin line between trust and desperation, morality and necessity. And Daniel knew that the next few days, or even hours, would test both of them in ways neither of them could yet predict. Because in matters of desperation, even the best intentions could have consequences no one anticipated. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel felt a chill of anticipation. Whatever happened next would define not just Rachel's future, but his own understanding of loyalty, trust, and human courage. The night wasn't over. Far from it. And the first real twist in this story had yet to fully reveal itself. Daniel stood up slowly, the chair behind him scraping softly against the floor. The sound felt louder than it should have, sharp in the quiet room. Rachel flinched, instinctively bracing herself as if expecting the worst. "Stay right there," he said, not unkindly but firm enough to freeze her in place. He walked toward the desk, his eyes scanning the stacks of cash with renewed focus. Not the shocked, emotional glance from earlier, but the kind he used in business, precise, methodical, almost clinical. He began counting quickly, his fingers moving with practiced ease. Rachel watched him, her heart hammering. Every second felt like a verdict being written. Daniel finished one stack, then another. He checked envelopes, ran quick calculations in his head, compared numbers he knew by memory alone. His expression didn't change, but the tension in his shoulders did. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it eased. He straightened and looked at her. "The amount here," he said carefully, "is exactly what it should be." Rachel swallowed. "Nothing is missing," he continued. "Not a single bill." Her breath broke free in a quiet, shaky exhale she hadn't realized she was holding. Her shoulders sagged, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse where she sat. "I told you," she whispered. "I didn't take anything." Daniel studied her face, really studied it this time. The fear hadn't been performative. The exhaustion wasn't an act. There was no triumph in her eyes, no relief born of getting away with something. Just raw vulnerability. "You didn't steal," he said, more to himself than to her. Rachel shook her head. "I couldn't. I wouldn't. I thought about it. I won't lie. When things got really bad, when my mom couldn't sleep from the pain and my brother stopped answering his phone, the thought crossed my mind. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't live with that. Daniel felt something shift inside him. He had expected excuses, rationalizations. Instead, he was hearing the truth, messy, imperfect, but honest. So why tonight? He asked. Why risk being caught at all? Rachel hesitated, then lifted her gaze. Because planning in my head wasn't enough anymore. I needed to see it. I needed to know once and for all whether there was any scenario where I could save them without crossing that line. I needed certainty. Daniel let out a slow breath. Certainty. That was a word he understood. You realize, he said, that most people would have taken it, especially under pressure like yours. I know, she replied softly. That's what scared me. Silence settled between them again, but it felt different now. The sharp edge was gone, replaced by something heavier, something more complicated. Daniel returned to his chair but didn't sit right away. When I walked in here tonight, he said, I saw a betrayal. I saw someone I trusted standing over my money, and I thought I finally understood why people warn you not to trust anyone completely. Rachel looked down, shame flickering across her face. But now, he continued, I'm realizing something else. You didn't betray me. You stood right at the edge and stopped. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Not yet. That doesn't mean what you did was harmless, Daniel added quickly. It was reckless, dangerous. You crossed boundaries you shouldn't have. But intent matters. And your intent, he paused, choosing his words. Your intent wasn't greed. Rachel nodded, her voice barely audible. I just wanted to protect them. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temple. This was the first real twist of the night, and it unsettled him more than anger ever could. He could punish theft. He could fire betrayal. But this lived in the gray space he avoided his entire life. Here's what troubles me, he said quietly. You didn't steal. Which means whatever you're planning next, you still haven't done it. Rachel stiffened. And that tells me, he continued, eyes narrowing slightly, that the situation is worse than you're letting on. Her silence answered before she did. There's something else, Daniel said. Something you haven't told me yet. Rachel's fingers tightened in her lap. Her breathing quickened, shallow and uneven. I didn't plan to say it tonight, she murmured. I didn't think I'd have to. But you do, Daniel said. Not harshly. Just honestly. She looked up at him then, fear plain in her eyes. Not fear of punishment, but fear of what the truth might change. Because whatever comes next, he added, will decide whether this ends here, or whether we're standing at the beginning of something much bigger. Rachel swallowed hard, her lips parting as if to speak, then stopping. And Daniel knew, with a certainty that made his chest tighten, that the next truth she revealed would carry consequences neither of them could walk away from untouched. Rachel stared at the floor for a long moment, as if the answer were written somewhere in the grain of the wood. Her shoulders rose and fell once, sharply. Then she lifted her head. There is something else, she said. Her voice was steady now, almost too steady. And it's worse than you think. Daniel didn't interrupt. He sat back, hands open on the armrests, giving her space. He could feel the shift in the room, the way the air tightens before a storm finally breaks. I didn't just come here to plan, she continued. I came here because I was trying not to make a decision I knew I wouldn't be able to undo. His eyes narrowed slightly. What decision? Rachel let out a small, humorless breath. I was going to take it. The words landed softly but carried weight. Daniel felt it in his chest. Not tonight, she added quickly. Not yet. But soon. If nothing changed. Daniel's jaw tightened, though he kept his voice even. How much? She hesitated. Enough to make the threat stop. Enough to get my mother into proper care. Enough that no one would come looking. And you plan to replace it? He asked. Yes, she said immediately. Over time. I mapped it out. Extra shifts. Side work. I even looked into selling my car. It would have taken years, but I would have done it. Daniel shook his head slowly. You're talking about stealing from your employer and hoping time would fix it. I know how it sounds, she said, eyes glistening. But when you're watching someone you love fade and another person you love disappear into fear, logic stops being clean. Everything becomes survival math. He believed her. That was the unsettling part. So what stopped you? He asked. Rachel's lips pressed together. Shame. The word surprised him. I kept imagining your face, she said. Not angry. Just disappointed. Like I'd confirmed something ugly you might already believe about people like me. Daniel felt a flicker of discomfort. People like you? Poor, she said simply. Invisible. Replaceable. The kind of people whose desperation always gets explained away as weakness or dishonesty. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. She wasn't accusing him. She was confessing a fear. I've spent my whole life proving I can be trusted, she continued. Doing things right even when no one was watching. And the idea that my worst moment would erase all of that, it scared me more than the threats. Daniel leaned forward slightly. So you stood in here tonight, right on the edge. Yes, she said. I needed to see it. To feel the weight of the choice. To know if I could live with myself afterward. And you couldn't, he said quietly. She shook her head. I couldn't. Silence stretched between them, thick and uneasy. Daniel felt the ground shift beneath his assumptions. He had walked in expecting to uncover theft. Instead, he was staring at the anatomy of restraint, how close someone could come to the line and still stop. That doesn't absolve you, he said finally. You still crossed boundaries. I know, Rachel replied. And I'm not asking to be absolved. I'm just telling you the truth. Daniel stood and walked toward the window. The city lights below flickered like a living thing, indifferent and constant. He had built his life believing that money simplified choices, that it reduced complexity. Tonight was proving him wrong. Do you know how many people I've trusted who never hesitated? He said, still facing the glass. Who smiled, shook my hand, and took what they wanted without losing a second of sleep? Rachel said nothing. You hesitated, he continued. You struggled. You stopped. And that complicates everything. He turned back to her. But here's the part you may not understand. Intent doesn't erase consequence. If you had taken it, even with plans to return it, you would have put yourself in a position you couldn't come back from. Her eyes dropped. I know. Do you? He asked gently. Because people don't always get second chances. Sometimes they just get labels. She swallowed hard. That's why I didn't do it. Daniel nodded once. Then, after a pause, is your brother still in immediate danger? Yes, she said. More than before. That was the part that settled heavily in his chest. Then whatever happens next, he said, choosing his words carefully, can't be impulsive. And it can't be handled the way you were about to handle it. Rachel looked up at him, hope flickering despite herself. Are you saying? I'm saying, he interrupted, holding up a hand, that I'm not done deciding. Her shoulders tensed again. Tonight showed me who you are under pressure, Daniel said. But it also showed me how bad things really are. And before I make any judgment about you, your job, or your future, I need to know something. She met his gaze. What exactly did your brother promise them, he asked, that made them so sure he could pay? Rachel's face drained of color. He didn't promise them money, she said slowly. Daniel felt a cold pull in his stomach. He promised them access. The word hung between them, heavy and dangerous. And in that moment, Daniel understood that whatever he thought this situation was, it had just become far more serious than either of them had admitted out loud. Daniel froze. The words lingered in the air, sharp and undeniable. Asterisk, he promised them access. Asterisk. Access? He repeated slowly, almost as if saying it out loud would make it less real. What kind of access? Rachel swallowed hard, her fingers twisting in her lap. They wanted information. About you. About your business. About the deals, the contacts, anything that could give them leverage. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Jerome thought if he could provide them something, they'd leave him alone. Daniel's pulse spiked. He had faced corporate espionage before, but this was different. This was personal. Too personal. The walls of his carefully controlled life suddenly felt thin, exposed. And your brother? Daniel asked carefully. Did he give them anything? Rachel shook her head violently. No. He realized how dangerous it was at the last minute. He was scared. He called me frantic, but it was already escalating. That's why I had to act. Daniel's mind raced. Every scenario he ran through ended in disaster. Confidential information leaked, deals compromised, reputations ruined. And yet Rachel hadn't crossed that line. She hadn't taken anything yet. She had only planned. You see why I panicked, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Because if they got anything, it wouldn't just be money anymore. It would be everything. I couldn't let that happen. That's why I came here. Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. He could feel the tension in the room tighten with each passing second. This wasn't just a matter of morality or trust anymore. This was strategy, survival, and protection all rolled into one. So that's why you needed to count the cash? He asked, connecting the dots. Rachel nodded. I needed to see what was immediately possible, what I could use to intervene before they went too far. I wanted to find a way to protect them, both Mom and Jerome, without jeopardizing you or your business. Daniel studied her. Every instinct screamed that this was reckless. Yet, beneath the chaos, there was clarity and bravery. She hadn't acted out of greed, but out of sheer necessity and love. Do you know, he said slowly, how close you came to making a mistake you couldn't come back from? Rachel flinched. I know. That's why I stopped. That's why I couldn't take anything. That's why I had to figure it out here, tonight, with the reality in front of me. Daniel leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. He realized that trust wasn't something you just lost or kept. It was something tested under fire. And tonight, Rachel had been under fire, facing consequences far beyond what he could have imagined. But, he said carefully, the real threat isn't over. If your brother gave even a hint of access, someone could trace it. And if they know where to look. Rachel's eyes widened. I haven't given them anything. I promise. Not a word, not a number, nothing. I believe you, Daniel said, voice low yet firm. But belief isn't enough. We have to act before belief stops mattering. Rachel's hands tightened in her lap. I don't know what else I can do. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. You already did the hardest thing. You admitted it. You faced me. That's more than most people would do. But now we have to fix it. Together. Rachel's eyes glimmered with relief and fear. She understood the magnitude of what Daniel was implying. There were no shortcuts, no easy solutions. One wrong move could undo months, even years of careful work. Daniel's mind ran through the possibilities. He could tighten security, confront Jerome's enemies, or even involve law enforcement, but each option carried risk. And time was already slipping through their fingers. You need to tell me everything, he said finally. Every interaction Jerome had. Every threat. Every phone call, every text. If we're going to protect him and your mother, we have to know the enemy inside and out. Rachel nodded, taking a deep breath. I will. I'll tell you everything. I promise. Daniel leaned back, feeling the weight of the situation settle heavily over him. The night had already revealed secrets he never imagined, and the revelation about access had pushed the stakes far beyond money. He realized with a grim certainty that whatever plan they executed next could determine not just his business, but the lives of people he barely knew, and the woman sitting before him who had risked everything out of loyalty and love. And somewhere deep in the silence, Daniel understood that this was only the beginning of a dangerous game. One wrong move, one slip, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of his penthouse. The city lights outside flickered as if echoing the tension inside, and Daniel felt the cold, sharp awareness that the night held far more twists yet to come. Because trust, desperation, and survival were now intertwined in a way neither of them could predict. And the next move would decide everything. The days that followed were quieter, but not calmer. Daniel didn't say much after that night. He didn't fire Rachel. He didn't suspend her. He didn't even change his tone with her. If anything, that unsettled her more. Silence, she had learned, could be heavier than anger. Life in the penthouse returned to its usual rhythm on the surface. Morning light spilled across marble floors. Coffee brewed at precisely the same time. Meetings came and went. But something underneath had shifted, like a fault line that had cracked but not yet given way. Daniel started noticing things he had never paid attention to before. Rachel arrived 10 minutes early every morning, not because anyone asked her to, but because she always had. He noticed how she paused briefly before entering his study now, steadying herself as if crossing an invisible line. He noticed how she avoided that room entirely unless specifically told otherwise. He noticed her hands. They shook sometimes when she thought no one was watching. Just slightly. Enough to suggest she was running on nerves and determination alone. One afternoon, Daniel passed through the kitchen unexpectedly and caught her laughing softly at something on her phone. The sound startled him. It was quick, unguarded, gone the moment she realized she wasn't alone. She straightened immediately. "Sorry," she said automatically, slipping the phone away. "For what?" he asked. She blinked. "I don't know. I just work." Daniel nodded and kept walking, but the moment followed him longer than it should have. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed at something small during the workday. At night, alone in the penthouse, he replayed fragments of her confession. Not the dramatic parts. The quieter ones. The shame. The hesitation. The way she had stood right at the edge and stopped. He reviewed security reports he normally skimmed. Access logs. Entry times. Camera footage. Not because he suspected her now, but because he needed certainty. Not just about Rachel, but about himself. About how close this situation had come to spiraling without his knowledge. Everything checked out. Rachel moved through the apartment with the same care she always had. No unusual patterns. No late-night wandering. No lingering near the study. If anything, she seemed smaller. Daniel watched her one morning as she carefully packed leftovers into a container during her break. She wrapped them with precision, labeling them with a marker she'd pulled from her bag. He realized she wasn't taking food home out of convenience. She was budgeting. Every action had intent behind it. "You don't have to do that," he said before he could stop himself. She looked up, startled. "Do what?" "Save scraps," he replied, immediately regretting how it sounded. Her expression shifted. Not offended, not defensive. Just honest. "I like knowing what I have." Daniel nodded. He understood that more than he wanted to admit. Later that day, during a call with his legal advisor, Daniel found himself distracted. Words like risk exposure and preventative containment floated past him, but his thoughts kept circling back to Rachel's brother. To access. To the kind of people who didn't wait patiently when promises went unfulfilled. That evening, as Rachel prepared to leave, Daniel spoke again. "How's your mother?" he asked casually, as if it were small talk. Rachel froze for half a second. Then, "About the same," she said. "Good days and bad days." He nodded. "And your brother?" Her eyes flicked up. "Still lying low." Another nod. No follow-up. But after she left, Daniel stood alone in the study longer than usual, staring at the desk where the money had been laid out days earlier. He realized something uncomfortable. Rachel hadn't just shown him her desperation. She had shown him how little he actually knew about the people whose lives moved quietly around his own. The next morning he noticed something new. Rachel was tired in a way that wasn't physical. Her movements were careful, but her focus drifted. She dropped a cloth, picked it up, apologized unnecessarily. "You okay?" Daniel asked. "Yes," she said too quickly. "You let it go." That afternoon, Daniel received an encrypted message from his security chief. Short, precise, the kind that never arrived without reason. It mentioned unusual inquiries, third parties asking questions. Not directly about him, but about internal schedules, staff patterns, peripheral details most people wouldn't think to ask. Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest. That night, as Rachel cleaned the kitchen, unaware of the message waiting on his phone, Daniel watched her longer than he should have. Not with suspicion, with concern. Because for the first time he understood something clearly. Rachel hadn't brought danger into his home. Danger had already been circling. And if he was right, the next move wouldn't come from her. It would come from outside. And when it did, it wouldn't announce itself. Daniel didn't watch the footage right away. The message from his security chief sat unread for nearly an hour while he paced the length of the penthouse, phone in hand, thoughts colliding faster than he could organize them. He told himself he was overreacting. That high-profile people attracted curiosity all the time. That not every inquiry meant danger. But deep down he knew better. By the time he finally sat in front of the monitor in his private office, the city outside had gone dark. The glass walls reflected his own face back at him, tired, older than he remembered, etched with a kind of tension money had never managed to erase. He pulled up the security system. Not the standard overview. The archived feeds. He hesitated for a moment, fingers hovering over the controls. This wasn't about catching Rachel anymore. That assumption had already died. This was about verifying something far more unsettling, whether he had missed signs long before that night in the study. The footage began rolling. Days passed and fast forward. Rachel arriving early, leaving on time. Cleaning, organizing, moving through the penthouse with the same quiet efficiency she always had. Nothing unusual. No suspicious pauses. No lingering near the study. Daniel exhaled, some part of him relaxing despite himself. Then he slowed the footage. He went back 2 weeks. The first few days revealed nothing new. Rachel followed her routine precisely. But on the 4th day something caught his eye. She stopped in the hallway near the study. Not entering. Just standing there. Daniel leaned closer to the screen. Rachel stood with her hand resting against the wall, head bowed slightly. She didn't look around. Didn't check for cameras. She stayed there for maybe 20 seconds before straightening and walking away. Daniel scrubbed back. Watched it again. She looked overwhelmed. Not calculating. Not sneaky. Just human. He kept watching. Later that same evening, another clip played. Rachel was in the kitchen, speaking quietly on her phone. The audio didn't reach that far, but her posture told the story. Shoulders tense. One hand gripping the counter hard enough to whiten her knuckles. At one point she covered her mouth. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He continued. The night of the study incident came up next. He slowed everything to real time. Rachel entered the study alone. She didn't rush. Didn't scan the room. She stood there for a long moment, breathing in, breathing out as if bracing herself. Then she sat. She opened the drawer. Her hand shook. Daniel watched as she laid the money out carefully, almost reverently. Not like someone handling something stolen. Like someone handling something dangerous. She counted. Recounted. Stopped. Pressed her palms flat on the desk and closed her eyes. At one point she reached for a stack, and stopped mid-motion. Her hand hovered there. Seconds passed. Then she pulled back. Daniel leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. She hadn't hesitated once. She had hesitated over and over. The footage ended just before he entered the room that night. Daniel sat there long after the screen went dark. Whatever doubts lingered were gone now. Rachel hadn't been testing how much she could take. She had been testing whether she could live with herself if she did. Daniel stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. The realization left him uneasy in a way he hadn't expected. Because restraint like that, true restraint, was rare. And it often went unnoticed until it was too late. His phone vibrated in his hand. Another message from security. This one longer. He read it once. Then again. The inquiries had increased. Same pattern. Different intermediaries. Questions about staff rotations. Delivery schedules. Blind spots in older buildings nearby. None of it illegal. All of it intentional. Daniel's jaw tightened. These weren't amateurs. And suddenly Rachel's brother's debt made terrifying sense. This wasn't about quick money. It was about leverage. About proximity. About patience. Daniel locked the screen and stood still, listening to the faint hum of the building. He thought of Rachel labeling leftovers. Of her shaking hands. Of the way she avoided the study now like it burned. She hadn't just been protecting her family. She had been protecting him. The realization settled heavily in his chest. Daniel picked up his phone and typed a single message to his security chief. Do not confront anyone yet. Quietly escalate. I want eyes on anyone connected to these inquiries. No mistakes. He paused, then added another line. And keep this contained. No staff involvement. He sent it. Across the penthouse, Rachel moved through the hallway, unaware of the decisions being made on her behalf. Unaware that the danger she feared was already closer than she realized. Daniel watched the city again, his reflection staring back at him. The footage had answered one question. But it had raised another, far more dangerous one. If these people were already probing the edges of his world, how long before they stepped inside? Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the study until the sky outside the windows began to pale, replaying the footage in his head even after he'd shut the screens down. Restraint. Hesitation. Fear. None of it fit the story he'd initially written for Rachel in his mind. And yet there was still something missing. A gap that logic alone couldn't close. At 6:30 in the morning, his phone vibrated again. Another message from security. Not about inquiries this time. About a discrepancy. Daniel read it once, then again, slower. His brow furrowed. There had been a small cash movement weeks ago. Not from the study. Not from any of the visible stacks. It was subtle. Quiet. The kind of thing that usually disappeared into routine accounting noise. But someone had flagged it because of timing. 2 weeks earlier. The same window Rachel had described as the beginning of everything. Daniel's first instinct was annoyance. His second was dread. He dressed quickly and left the penthouse earlier than usual, telling himself he was going to the office. Instead, he asked security for an address. A modest townhouse on the south side of the city. He didn't tell Rachel where he was going. He didn't tell anyone. The neighborhood was quiet in the morning light. Not dangerous. Not dramatic. Just tired. Lawns that needed mowing. Paint that had seen better decades. Daniel parked across the street and sat there longer than necessary watching the front door. He told himself he was here to confirm facts. Nothing more. After a few minutes, the door opened. A woman stepped out, adjusting a jacket around a young child's shoulders. The kid laughed at something Daniel couldn't hear. The sound carried anyway. Bright. Unforced. They looked stable. Not desperate. But not comfortable either. Daniel's phone buzzed. A follow-up message from security filled in the rest. The cash hadn't been taken directly. It had been converted. Quietly. Through a legitimate channel. Anonymously routed to settle an urgent housing arrear and medical bill tied to this address. No names attached. No return path. Daniel closed his eyes. Rachel. He stayed in the car, watching as the woman and child walked down the sidewalk and disappeared around the corner. No celebration. No gratitude directed outward. Just life continuing, unaware of the quiet intervention that had kept it intact. Daniel drove back to the penthouse in silence. When Rachel arrived later that morning, she looked startled to see him waiting in the kitchen. He was seated at the table, hands folded, coffee untouched. "Good morning," she said cautiously. "Morning," he replied. "Sit down." She did. "You didn't take money that night in the study?" Daniel said calmly. "That part was true." Rachel nodded, unsure where this was going. "But you did take some before," he continued. 2 weeks earlier." The color drained from her face. She started. "Let me finish," Daniel said gently. "You didn't take it for your brother. Or your mother." Her eyes dropped. "You used it to help a family about to lose their home," he said. "A medical emergency. A child involved." Rachel's shoulders sagged, the fight leaving her all at once. "I was going to pay it back," she whispered. "I already started figuring out how. I didn't think you'd ever notice." Daniel watched her carefully. There was no pride in her confession. No attempt to justify herself. Just quiet acceptance. "Why them?" he asked. She swallowed. "Because they didn't ask. And because they reminded me of us a long time ago. One missed payment away from falling through everything." Daniel leaned back slowly. This was the second truth. The one she hadn't told him. Not because it was worse, but because it complicated everything. "You crossed a line," he said. "And you knew it." "Yes," she replied. "That's why I stopped after that. I couldn't keep doing it." "And yet," Daniel said, "you didn't hesitate to help strangers." Rachel finally looked up at him. They had no one else. The room was quiet. Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. It wasn't admiration. Not quite. It was discomfort. The kind that came when your moral math no longer balanced. "You didn't steal for yourself," he said. "You stole to prevent harm." "I know that doesn't make it right," she said quickly. "No," Daniel agreed. "It doesn't." He stood and walked to the counter, staring at the city through the glass. "But it tells me who you are when no one is watching." Rachel said nothing. "I've known a lot of generous people," he continued. "Most of them are generous with other people's approval. You did something wrong for a reason you didn't even want credit for." He turned back to her. "That scares me more than greed." Her eyes filled, but she stayed silent. "Because it means," Daniel went on, "you're capable of making decisions based on conscience instead of consequence." Rachel's voice broke. "I just didn't want another family to disappear." Daniel nodded slowly. "And now," he said, "we have a problem. Because the people circling my life aren't looking for kindness. They're looking for access. Pressure points. People who will act under fear." Rachel stiffened. "I won't talk. I won't give them anything." "I know," Daniel said. "That's not what worries me." He glanced toward the hallway, then back at her. "What worries me," he said quietly, "is that you've already proven you'll break rules to protect others." Rachel's breath caught. "And that makes you valuable," he added. "To the wrong people." The words hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Outside, the city moved on as usual. Inside the penthouse, Daniel realized they had crossed into a far more serious phase of this story. Because the second truth hadn't redeemed Rachel. It had put her directly in the line of fire. And if Daniel was right, someone else already knew it. Daniel didn't sleep that night either. He sat in his study, the city lights painting slivers of gold and white across the polished wood floor. The penthouse was quiet, but the silence felt charged, alive, as if the walls themselves were waiting. He had spent the day tracing every move Rachel had made over the past month, cross-checking deliveries, calls, even minor transactions. Everything was clean. Everything except the second truth. Rachel had taken money to help a family in need. She hadn't stolen for herself, but the act of breaking the rules, breaking trust, even for good reasons, put a target on her back. And now Daniel realized that what started as a personal dilemma had become something far bigger. He heard the faint click of the front door. She had returned from her late shift. Her steps were light, careful, but he noticed the slight hesitation at the threshold, the way she paused as though weighing the space she was entering. "Daniel," she began, uncertain. He gestured for her to sit. "I saw the logs," he said quietly. "The second time. The family you helped." Her eyes widened. Don't try to justify it," he interrupted. "I just need to understand why you took that risk." She lowered her gaze. "They had no one. I couldn't stand by. And I thought, maybe I could fix it before anyone knew. Before it got worse." Daniel ran a hand over his face. He knew the human instinct to protect others, to act when others won't, but he also knew the danger of exposure. He had been watching patterns for years. Opportunists, predators, they always found the cracks. And Rachel had just created one. "Do you know," he asked slowly, "how dangerous that was?" "Yes," she whispered. "I didn't care. Not really. I wanted to do the right thing." Daniel leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "And now they might know," he said. "The wrong people." Her throat tightened. "I didn't give them anything. I swear." "I know," he replied. "But your actions set a precedent. And in the wrong hands, that precedent can be exploited." Rachel shivered. "I don't know what to do." Daniel considered his options. Confrontation, security reinforcement, even calling law enforcement, but each carried its own risk. What they needed now wasn't reaction. It was strategy. Calculated, deliberate, and fast. "I'm going to help you," he said finally. "But we do this my way." She blinked, surprise flashing across her face. "Your way?" "Yes," Daniel said. "We create the rules. We control the information. We anticipate the next move before anyone else can. And we do it quietly. No mistakes. No improvisation." Rachel nodded, swallowing hard. Okay, I'll follow you." He gave a small, grim smile. "Good. Because the people circling your brother, the family, they're patient. But patience doesn't last forever. They'll test every limit. And we need to be ready." Her hands trembled slightly. "I never thought I'd be involved in anything like this." "Neither did I," he admitted. "But now you are. And every decision from here on will matter. Lives will hang in the balance, and one misstep." He let the sentence trail, heavy with implication. Rachel's lips pressed together. "I understand." Daniel's phone buzzed. A secure message from his security chief. Brief. Urgent. Details of a meeting request. Unmarked car. Time. Tomorrow morning. Daniel's pulse quickened. He read it again. The message confirmed his fears. Someone was making a move. Someone connected to Jerome's debt, the inquiries, the pressure. Someone who wanted leverage. He looked at Rachel. "Tomorrow we take the first step. But you need to know." She nodded, anticipation and fear dancing in her eyes. "Tomorrow nothing is guaranteed," he said. "Not safety, not success, not even your freedom. Every action will count." Rachel swallowed, the weight of the words sinking in. "I understand." Daniel leaned back in the chair, eyes narrowing. "And we start by watching every detail. Every person. Every contact. And we find out exactly who is pulling the strings." The room fell silent, the quiet only broken by the distant hum of the city. But outside, the shadows were moving, and the game had already begun. Neither of them yet knew how high the stakes really were, or how close the first trap already waited. The morning came with no warning, just a thin gray light slipping through the glass walls of the penthouse. Daniel had already been awake for hours. He stood near the window, watching the city below move as if nothing were wrong. Cars flowed. People hurried. Somewhere down there, someone was preparing to tighten a net he could barely see. Rachel sat at the kitchen island, untouched coffee cooling between her hands. She had changed into simple clothes, nothing that would draw attention. Her face looked calm, but her foot tapped against the stool in a steady, nervous rhythm. Do you trust me? Daniel asked without turning. She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to say yes, but because the word felt heavier than it ever had before. I think I do, she said carefully. Daniel nodded once. That's enough for now. They left separately just as he instructed. No shared elevator ride. No visible connection. Rachel exited first, slipping into the service elevator like any other morning. Daniel waited 10 minutes before following, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. The meeting location was a private financial consulting firm in Midtown, one of those polished glass offices that looked legitimate enough to hide almost anything. Daniel had used the firm before years ago, as a buffer between himself and people who wanted access they hadn't earned. The unmarked car waited exactly where the message said it would. Daniel slid into the back seat. The driver didn't speak. Neither did the man beside him, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit too well to be bought off the rack. Mr. Caldwell, the man finally said, using Daniel's last name. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I didn't agree, Daniel replied evenly. I was invited. A faint smile. Fair enough. They drove in silence for several blocks before stopping near the consulting firm. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and expensive cologne. They were led into a small conference room. No windows. One camera in the corner blinking red. This won't take long, the man said, taking a seat across from Daniel. We're here because of a recent financial irregularity tied to one of your domestic employees. Daniel didn't react. Irregularity is a vague term. The man slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed screenshots, transfer records, dates, amounts. Not everything, but enough to make a point. Daniel exhaled slowly. You're well informed. We try to be, the man said. There are people who believe your household has flexible ethics. That generosity can be encouraged. Daniel closed the folder. If you're suggesting extortion, you're doing a poor job disguising it. The man's smile didn't falter. We prefer the word partnership. Daniel leaned forward. You have nothing that implicates me. And what you have on my employee doesn't prove theft. Only intent. That depends on who's asking, the man replied. Regulators can be very creative. Daniel studied him. You're not regulators. No, the man agreed. But we know how to get their attention. Daniel leaned back silent. He let the pause stretch. People like this always mistook silence for weakness. What do you want? He asked finally. The man named a number. Daniel didn't blink. No. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. You might want to reconsider. Daniel stood. This meeting is over. As he reached the door, the man spoke again. Your maid's brother. Jerome. That's his name, right? Daniel stopped. The man continued softly. Debt has a way of spreading. Especially when someone tries to pay it down quietly. Daniel turned slowly. If anything happens to him? You'll do what? The man asked. Spend money? Call lawyers? You're very good at those things. But you're not the only one with reach. Daniel held his gaze for a long moment. Then he left without another word. Across the city, Rachel sat on a bench near a small public library, pretending to read. Her phone buzzed once. A single message from an unknown number. We know you're trying to help. That can get people hurt. Her hands went cold. She looked up just as a man across the street met her eyes. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply turned and walked away. Rachel stood, heart racing. Daniel had warned her. They were testing boundaries, letting her know she was seen. By the time Daniel reached his car, his phone buzzed too. A secure alert from his security team. They've made contact. With her. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. This wasn't negotiation anymore. It was pressure. And pressure meant escalation. He typed a single reply. Proceed with contingency. That night, as Rachel lay awake staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, she realized something that made her chest ache. This was never just about money. And the people circling them weren't done asking. Not yet. Daniel moved fast once contingency was in motion. By sunrise, the penthouse no longer felt like a home. It felt like a command center. Screens glowed along one wall of the study, each showing live feeds, transaction maps, call trees, and movement logs. His security chief, Leonard, stood nearby with a tablet, jaw tight, eyes sharp. They didn't just test her, Leonard said. They mapped her. Work schedule. Transit routes. Contacts. Someone's been patient. Daniel stared at the screen showing Rachel's apartment building. How close did they get? Close enough to send a message without touching her, Leonard replied. That's intentional. They want fear, not police. Daniel exhaled through his nose. Fear made people sloppy. Fear also made them obedient. That was the game. Jerome? Daniel asked. Leonard hesitated. We moved him last night. Temporary housing. Quiet location. He doesn't know why. Good, Daniel said. Keep it that way. Across town, Rachel sat in a borrowed car outside a diner she'd never visited before. Leonard's team had insisted she change routines immediately. Different routes. Different times. Different clothes. It made her feel like she was wearing someone else's life. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. You didn't listen. Her chest tightened. She didn't respond. Leonard had been clear. No replies, no reactions. Silence was protection. She stared through the windshield at the diner's fogged windows. Families inside laughed softly over coffee. A couple argued in hushed tones. Life continuing. Normal. It felt distant, like a movie she used to watch before everything fractured. Her phone buzzed again. We don't want trouble. Just cooperation. Rachel's hand shook. Cooperation meant giving up. It meant handing over whatever they wanted and hoping it would be enough. It never was. At the penthouse, Daniel watched the message appear on his own screen seconds later. His jaw tightened. They're escalating, Leonard said. Still indirect, but the language changed. They think she's the weak point, Daniel replied. Leonard glanced at him. Isn't she? Daniel didn't answer right away. They think I'll protect her quietly. That I'll pay to make it go away. And will you? Daniel finally turned. No. Leonard raised an eyebrow. Then what's the play? Daniel's gaze hardened. We expose the structure. Not publicly. Surgically. Leonard understood. This wasn't about law enforcement yet. It was about leverage. About turning pressure back on the people applying it. By afternoon, Daniel requested a meeting through the same consulting firm. Same channel. Different tone. Cooperative. Curious. Willing. The reply came within minutes. Tomorrow. Same place. They're confident, Leonard said. Good, Daniel replied. Confidence makes people careless. That evening, Rachel was brought to the penthouse for the first time since everything began. She hesitated at the door, unsure if she belonged in this version of the space. The calm, warm apartment she'd known was gone, replaced by quiet urgency. Daniel met her in the living room. They contacted you again. Yes, she said. I didn't answer. Good. She took a breath. Daniel, my brother. Is he safe? Yes, he said without hesitation. And he will stay that way. Her shoulders sagged slightly, relief leaking out despite her effort to stay composed. I never wanted this. I know, Daniel said. That's why they chose you. She looked at him. Then why keep me involved? Why not send me away? Daniel studied her face. Because running confirms weakness. And because you understand something they don't. She frowned. What? That money isn't power, he said. Control is. And they think they have it. He stepped closer. Tomorrow I'm meeting them again. They believe I'm coming to negotiate. Rachel's eyes widened. That's dangerous. Yes, Daniel agreed. But necessary. She swallowed. What do you need from me? Nothing, he said, except honesty and courage. Rachel laughed once, softly, without humor. I didn't ask for courage. No one ever does, Daniel replied. Later that night, as Rachel tried to sleep on the guest bed, her phone buzzed one last time. Tomorrow ends this, one way or another. She stared at the screen until it went dark. Somewhere across the city, Daniel stood alone, staring out at the skyline, already calculating the cost of the next move. Because tomorrow wouldn't just end something. It would reveal who had been lying from the very beginning. The morning was cold, sharp, and merciless. Daniel arrived at the consulting firm first, dressed in a crisp suit that gave nothing away. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that carried a subtle warning. He walked past the polished floors and glass walls, aware of every step, every echo, every possibility. The man from the previous meeting was waiting, calm, polished, but with a tension Daniel could smell like ozone before a storm. Mr. Caldwell, he said, voice smooth. Right on time. Daniel didn't reply. He gestured for the man to lead the way into the conference room. The space was identical to before, small, windowless, and intimidating in its neutrality. Only this time Daniel noticed something new. 2 additional chairs sat at the table. Empty for now, but the implication clear. Shall we begin? The man asked. Daniel sank into his chair, hands folded. I think we already have. A moment passed, heavy with unspoken threats. Then the door clicked open. 2 more men entered, sharp suits, sharp eyes. Daniel's pulse ticked up. These were the enforcers, not negotiators. The people who turned leverage into action. The first man spoke, cold and precise. We know who you are protecting. We also know who you care about. And we know what you value. Daniel studied them, unmoving. Do you? The second man smiled faintly. We do. And that's why this doesn't have to be messy. Daniel leaned forward. I don't make deals under threat. And you've been testing boundaries for weeks now. Every contact, every inquiry, it's all traceable. A flicker of surprise passed across one of the enforcers' faces. Traceable? Yes, Daniel said. And I've already taken steps. My security team has eyes everywhere relevant. That includes the channels you've been using to communicate. The first man's smile vanished. You're bluffing. Daniel shook his head slowly. No bluff. Just reality. I've seen the pattern from the beginning. And the second truth about your pressure points, that my employee took money for others, only confirms what I suspected. The room went still. You used a family member's debt as leverage, Daniel continued. You didn't calculate the human element. That was your mistake. The enforcers exchanged quick glances. Something shifted. Confidence faltered. Daniel leaned back. Now we have 2 options. 1, you walk away quietly. Nobody loses anything further. 2, you continue to escalate, and I expose every single connection, every inquiry, every attempt at coercion to authorities who will not be as forgiving as I am. The first man's hand twitched slightly. Daniel noticed. The faintest tremor. You underestimate your opponent, Daniel said softly. You thought fear was enough to bend us. But courage and restraint can be more powerful than any threat you can conjure. Another long pause. Then the first man spoke, voice lower. You've won the game, Mr. Caldwell. Daniel didn't smile. I haven't won anything yet. I've just avoided the worst outcome. But know this, if you try anything again there will be no negotiation. Only consequences. The men gathered their papers, leaving the room with carefully measured steps. Silence lingered. Daniel exhaled, finally letting the tension ebb. The battle was over, for now. But his mind was already racing, planning contingencies, imagining what might come next. Later that day he returned to the penthouse. Rachel was in the kitchen, quiet, stirring a cup of tea. She looked up at him, cautious but relieved. They left? She asked. Daniel nodded. For now. They won't test us again anytime soon. But the lesson is clear. Never underestimate patience, courage, or the people you think are weaker than you. Rachel smiled faintly, a light breaking through the tension. I guess I learned that the hard way. Daniel approached, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. No, you learned it in the right way. With restraint, honesty, and courage. She looked down at the floor. I almost ruined everything. Daniel shook his head. You saved more than you know. You just didn't see it at the time. Rachel's eyes met his, and for the first time in weeks there was no fear. Only quiet understanding. The city lights outside began to twinkle as night fell. The danger had passed, for now, but the bond formed between them was undeniable. Trust, tested under fire, had emerged stronger. And as Rachel finally relaxed, letting out a long, shaky breath, Daniel realized something important. Sometimes the people you least expect, flawed, human, and imperfect, are the ones capable of incredible courage. And sometimes that courage can change everything. He stepped back, allowing her space. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow life goes on. But tonight, you rest. You earned it. Rachel nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. For the first time in weeks she felt safe. And somewhere deep in the penthouse, Daniel knew that no money, no threat, and no plan could ever replace the quiet strength of a human heart. Outside, the city continued its endless hum, oblivious to the battles fought in quiet rooms. But inside, a small victory had been won. A victory of restraint, courage, and the unexpected power of doing the right thing even when no one was watching. The game was over. The lesson remained. And both of them had survived it, wiser, stronger, and forever changed.